You know, in this video, I just want to expose something to do with the social welfare, because I think oftentimes the letter or the spirit of a legislation has been failed to be recognised. One second, I'll just get the document. So, sorry, I'm 40 now and I'm making noises when I get up and down out of the chair. So, and I'm disabled. So I've applied for disability allowance and it has been denied me. And I want to make a video about that because the criteria that a person has to satisfy, or the conditions to avail of disability allowance, I have satisfied. Absolutely. And that's why the doctor put me forward for disability allowance. Doctors don't put you forward for disability allowance because they don't think you're actually in need of it or you qualify for it. So my question is, why does the social welfare think that their medical assessor, who hasn't been in your immediate proximity, hasn't run any diagnostics, hasn't any previous engagements with you whatsoever, is better qualified to make a decision as to whether you have a need for disability allowance or not than the doctor that you've been seeing since you got the injury? How do they think that they're better qualified than him when they go on the evidence that he gives them? And he has looked at that evidence and found that you are eligible for disability allowance, such to put you forward for it. And then they say, well, we're just going on what the doctor said. Well, if you are, then you would have given me the disability allowance because the doctor has put me forward for it. So that's obviously a lie. Next lie. It says here, dear Mr. Talon, I refer to your, seems to be a generic letter. I refer to your application for disability allowance received on 24/7/2024 in order to qualify for disability allowance. You must satisfy the eligibility conditions set out under Section 210 of the Social Welfare Consolidation Act 2005. As amended, these include medical conditions and means assessment, that you be habitually resident in the state, that's not a problem. A means assessment was done, so those two boxes are ticked, and be between 16 and 66 years of age, ticked. Having examined all of the documents provided in support of your claim and having weighed up the evidence, I have decided that you do not satisfy the conditions for receipt of disability allowance. Your application has been disallowed for the following reasons. 1. You do not satisfy the medical criteria for disability allowance. Under section, and then it goes to specifically explain that or attempt to. Under section 210(1)(b) of the Social Welfare Consolidation Act 2005, as amended, and Article 137 of the Social Welfare Consolidated Claims, Payments and Control Regulations 2007, as amended, in order to qualify for disability allowance. 1. You must be suffering from an injury. Yep. Disease. Yep. Congenital deformity. No. Or physical or mental illness. Physical. Yep. Or defect, which has continued or may reasonably be expected to continue for the period of at least a year. Yes, I satisfy that. Listen to how it's worded. Illness or defect which has continued or, not and, or may reasonably be expected to continue for the period of at least a year. So I have had a hip injury for going on 2 years. I've had shoulder injuries for 4 years. I have IBS. I have an injury to my thumb. I'm a croc. The hip injury is quite serious. It sees me having to get around by bicycle because I need to be in a seated position to take the stress off my hip. And then I can put the strain and the force on the lower extremities of the leg and not on the hip. And when I'm approaching any sort of an incline, I can favour my strong leg and my strong hip and ease up on my left leg. And then obviously when I'm freewheeling or it's really light travel, then it's not an issue. But bending down, certainly picking things up, I can't do it. Even sitting down low into a lower squat, I can't do it. I wouldn't be able to go into a kitchen and take the onions off the bottom shelf from the back of the fridge. I wouldn't be able to physically do it, let alone 50 times a day. I'm just not in physical condition to do that. And the doctor knows it. They've assessed me. They know I'm not a lazy man. They know I'm willing to work. They know I've applied while I was well. I've applied for over 200 jobs in Wexford. I've all the evidence of that. I can show you on Indeed all the refusal after refusal after refusal for work. And, you know, now I can show that I'm incapable of doing that work to the social welfare. In fact, it was when I injured my hip, I was homeless on the street, sleeping on my hip on the hard ground for 6 months. And there was only a little mat between me and the ground. And so it rendered my hip severely injured. And I have IBS, which means I'm not very well nourished. I'm not full in the full of my health, medically speaking. So I'm much more susceptible to re-injury and even new injuries because my recovery rates aren't what they should be because of the poor absorption in my gut. So all of these things taken into account, the doctor said, this man is not fit for work. He's not fit for full-time employment. And I knew that, and I had said that to the social welfare. They said, look, let's see how the injury goes. It may not be long-lasting, it may clear up. We'll leave you on the social welfare for now. Let's see how your injury goes. So I kept in constant communication with them, and it got to the point where I said, I can't pretentiously do this anymore. I'm not fit for work. I can't go and start a job today. I'm just not physically able. So I'm not going to be lying on the social welfare and pretending that there's the possibility that I'm just going to be able to go to work today. One of the conditions of being on social welfare is that you can take up full-time employment, you know, on the social welfare or the job seekers allowance. So there are other payments, even other payments apart from disability. Like there's a payment that you can get if you don't get the disability allowance, which I find kind of silly, because if you're not fit for work and you can show that you haven't been in work for over a year because of this injury, which I can and have, it's in the evidence that I've provided the department, then you have satisfied the requirement there under the Section 210 of the Social Welfare Consolidation Act 2005. And so I just want to repeat that I have been in constant communication with social welfare from when I was injured. I've been above board and transparent with them. And it's all on my file. So the fact that they're telling me I don't satisfy one of the conditions of the section or the legislation is just pretentious and a blatant lie. It says you must be suffering from an injury, disease, congenital deformity or physical, mental illness or defect which has continued for the period of at least a year. So we're going on 2 years now. So I've satisfied that. It doesn't say which has continued and may reasonably be expected. It says or may reasonably be expected. So the condition is actually satisfied because I've been out of work on the basis of an injury for over a year. And the injury has persisted for nearly 2 years. So I have satisfied that aspect of the legislation. Now, unless they think that a man who has a hip injury for going on 2 years and it hasn't healed is going to heal within the third year, even if that was a condition. They would have to show that to be able to disqualify me. They would have to say, actually, we think your hip is going to heal in 6 months because... And they haven't. They don't have that facility. They don't have that ability. So this is all pretentious. The condition is that you have been out of work, have been, past tense, for over a year, or may reasonably be expected to continue for the period of at least a year. So I've already satisfied that. And if I haven't healed in 2 years, it's not likely that I'm going to heal in the next year without surgical intervention, is it? It's nearly 2 years now since I injured the hip. It was diagnosed in the A&E. I was brought for physical therapy, and they said it's too early to work on that because of your medical condition, because of all things taken into account. I'm not prepared to work on that hip yet. So they wouldn't even touch me because of the hip injury. It was that bad. Now it's continued and persisted for 2 years. I can't sit in a chair comfortably because you have to use your hip to stay upright. The only way I can get comfortable in a chair is recline. I can't sit up in a chair because that requires you to use your hip. So I don't know what kind of work they think I can do. Do you see what I'm saying? Like if you tell somebody they're not disabled, then you're telling them they're fit for work. There's no in between. Now, I know that there are certain conditions, particularly for disability, because there are other payments that you can receive if you're not fit for work. Illness benefit is one that you can only receive if you have stamps, but there's another one that if you don't have stamps, you can receive. This is my information from social welfare. So I'm not afraid that I'm not going to get money. My issue is that I am satisfying the conditions for disability. Currently. I have, and they're just lying to me. Because it says here, and I'll repeat, you must be suffering from an injury, disease, congenital deformity, or physical or mental illness. So, injury, yeah. Disease, yeah. IBS, very serious disease. Because it sees you weak all the time. You're not in the full of your strength. Congenital deformity, no. Or physical or mental illness. Physical illness, yeah. Or defect, yeah. I've a list of them. Which has continued or may reasonably, now listen, which has continued or may reasonably be expected. So it has continued for nearly 2 years now, and that can be shown. And the other injuries that have been mentioned in the application, it's not on the basis of just one injury. This is what's amazing, that they think there's some kind of suitable work out there for me that they haven't been able to state. So I have satisfied that, and they've said that I haven't. That's a lie. Number 2, as a result of the condition, is substantially restricted in undertaking work, which would otherwise be suitable having regard for your age, experience and qualifications. Okay, so they have said that there is suitable work for me on the basis of the level of incapacitation that I have. But they haven't stated what that is. So if they haven't stated what it is, they haven't assessed what it is, haven't taken the time to gather what that type of work might be, because now they're obligated to state what that work might be. Because if they're saying that that's the only reason that I'm disqualified from the payment, they have to clearly state what that suitable work would be given my current physical state. And then I could go back on social welfare and apply for that type of work. That's reasonable. That's fair. So what is this type of work that they think that I'm, given my experience and qualifications and age, am suitable to do. Now the plot thickens because they've lied. They've said that I haven't satisfied that aspect of the legislation which I have. I've been out of work on the basis of an injury for 2 years, and that injury is still present. But they're saying that it doesn't look like it's going to continue for another year. It's continued for nearly 2. It doesn't say in the legislation that you have to show that you will be out of work for another year. You just have to show that you've been out of work for a year, or that you will be out of work for a year. So it's one or the other, not the two. If you've shown that you've been out of work and are still out of work for over a year on the basis of the same injury, you have satisfied the legislation. They have claimed that I haven't. They're lying. They're just lying. Secondly, as a result of the condition is substantially restricted in undertaking work. Yeah, absolutely. Substantially restricted. Like I'm a chef and I can't chef. That would be substantially restricted. Like I'm a chef, that's my qualification, and I can't chef. Like I can't drive. I can't press a clutch down for 2 hours in a car, let alone do an 8-hour shift delivering goods or something. I am a cripple. I'm a cripple, and these people are turning away a cripple that a doctor has sent to them for a disability allowance. Now, the plot thickens, and I'm going to read it to you. I have examined all the documents provided in support of this application, and having weighed up the evidence, I have examined all the documents provided. This is the deciding officer. Listen carefully now, how they lie to me in this. Just barefaced lie and contradict themselves on many different points. The deciding officer, who hasn't even put their name to this, just says deciding officer. Faceless. I have examined all the documents provided in support of this application, and having weighed up the evidence, including the MA opinion, that's medical assessor, I have decided that the applicant is not substantially restricted in seeking suitable employment by reason of a specified disability. Wait now. Which is expected to last for a period of at least 1 year. It has lasted for nearly 2 years. That's the legislation satisfied. It doesn't have to be expected to continue for a year. That's not necessarily a condition of acceptance. As we've said, I'll read it again. You must be suffering from an injury, disease, congenital deformity, or physical or mental illness or defect which has continued or may reasonably be expected to continue. So it's been 2 years and it's still happening, and it doesn't look like it's healing anytime soon. It's still as bad as it was 2 years ago. Right? And they're saying that I don't satisfy that when I do. And they've said they've examined all the documents. So if they've examined all the documents, they know that's a lie. That I do satisfy that section of the legislation. So they're lying if they have examined all the documents. Just lying. Secondly, although the medical evidence shows a level of incapacity. Oh, it does. The medical evidence shows a level of incapacity. That's a specified disability. Because they said restricted in seeking suitable employment by reason of a specified disability. A level of incapacity is a specified disability. Although the medical evidence shows a level of incapacity, That's a specified disability. Couldn't be anything else. Forked tongue. It's contradictory speech. It's doublespeak. Although the medical evidence shows a level of incapacity, it does not show substantial restriction, which would preclude the person from taking up work. The person that the doctor says is out of work for a legitimate reason and incapacity and disability is not substantially restricted from taking up work. So they say, when I rang them yesterday to follow up on this, they said we can only go on what the doctor has said. The doctor says I'm out of work. I'm not capable of working. They're only going on what the doctor said. Do you know what she said to me? Maybe the doctor can send a stronger letter. A stronger, what, like, put him on disability or else? Like, what are they talking about? Although the medical evidence shows a level of incapacity, that's disability. That's a specific disability, because you cannot ascertain an incapacity. It's just another word for disability. So, although the medical evidence shows a level of disability, it does not show substantial restriction. Substantial. So, they're saying that this decision is in the nitty-gritty. This decision is in the level of restriction. Okay? So, they must then therefore know exactly what that level of disability is, right? But they haven't assessed it physically themselves. But the doctor has assessed me. Now, he's my personal GP. The doctor at the hospital where I showed up in emergency with my hip, it was that bad. They sent me for physio, and the physio said, I can't work on that yet. It's too bad. Given your medical condition, your IBS, your obvious physical weakness as a result of it, I cannot work on that hip yet. That's how severe it is. So, I mean, I don't know where these people are getting their morals from, but they're just barefaced lying to the applicant. I do satisfy Section 210 because I've been out of work with this injury for nearly 2 years. You must be suffering from an injury which has continued or may reasonably be expected to continue for a period of a year. I satisfy that. They said I don't, and they said they examined the evidence. They clearly have not. So, if they haven't done that right, how can we trust them in anything else? As a result of the condition is substantially restricted in undertaking work. The doctor would not work on the injury yet. It was that severe. I've been out of work for 2 years. It got a little bit better in the meantime, and then it got worse again. And who knows, it might get worse again. But certainly there has not been any sign of it getting better and continuing to get better. There's no sign of that. For 2 years. And they're talking about a level of restriction, that they acknowledge a level of incapacity, but there's still suitable work for me out there. So what is this suitable work? They haven't bothered to even begin to give myself, the social welfare, or the doctor any inkling of what they believe the suitable employment is that I should be seeking. Because the doctor, my GP, is telling me that I'm not fit for work. I'm not fit for work. So who do I listen to? The medical assessor who hasn't seen me, or the doctor who has? Whose advice should I take? Because I'm not paying the medical assessor to tell me whether I'm fit for work or not. I'm paying the doctor. I've never even met the medical assessor. The state give me medical card to go and get the advice of a doctor they then ignore. What kind of a system is that? Now they're just lying to me. Just barefaced. Saying I don't satisfy legislation I do satisfy. Just barefaced lies. Like, you wouldn't mind if there was something, just mixed up, or there was, something was just a mistake, or on the basis of an difference of opinion, or they're just lying. They're just lying to me. They're just saying, they're just misrepresenting the legislation. You're saying that I've been disqualified on the basis that that by reason of a specified disability, I would be out of work for a period of at least one more year. Like, that's not the condition that the legislation stipulates must be satisfied. It's only one of the conditions. It's this or that, and or that. Not like it can be that as well, but it doesn't have to be that as well. If you've been out of work for 2 years as a result of an injury, you are then therefore eligible for disability. You don't have to show or prove that you're going to be out of work for another year. Just that you have been out of work for a year. Or that you will be out of work for a year. So if you can show that you'll be out of work for a year, it wouldn't make sense for them to disallow your disability allowance, because the doctor's saying, no, definitely this person won't be working for a year. So why would you disqualify them, right? But if they've already been out of work for 2 years and there's evidence of the injury going back 2 years, then obviously they've satisfied the legislation. I'll read it again, and this is the last time I'll read it. You must be suffering from an injury which has continued or may reasonably be expected to continue for the period of at least a year. 2 years. So they're just lying to me. That's the reason they're giving me for disqualifying me. And the other reason is, as a result of the condition, is substantially restricted in undertaking work. Yeah, I've been out of work for 2 years. I haven't been able to continue in full-time employment for 2 years because of the injury and the illness. For 2 years. But they're saying, as a result of the condition, is substantially restricted in undertaking work. 2 years. Like, it's mental. Like, that's not even sane. That they would throw up these two parts of the legislation as the reasonings behind disqualifying me from disability allowance. I've satisfied both of these. I have satisfied both of those conditions. More than I needed to. Not 1 year, but 2 years of unemployment on the basis of injury. And even more than that, on the basis of my shoulders being injured. Both my rotator cuffs were damaged by the police when I was falsely arrested in Waterford and acquitted. You must be suffering from an injury which has continued for the period of at least a year. Satisfied. That's substantial restriction in undertaking work. Satisfied. That's not worth the paper it's written on. They're not the reasons to disqualify me. I satisfy both of those more than I need to. But then they write a little personal letter just to contradict themselves even more and push the boat out into the deep seas of obscurity. I have examined all the documents provided in support of this application, and having weighed up the evidence, including the MA opinion, the medical assessor, I have decided that the applicant is not substantially restricted in seeking suitable employment. How does 2 years of being prevented from gaining work not amount to substantially restricted in this officer's mind? Now, when you ring them up, they'll say the medical assessor and the deciding officer can only go on what the doctor has said. The doctor has put me forward for disability allowance. He signed his name to it, put a stamp on it. Are you gathering this now? Although the medical evidence shows a level of incapacity. Again, I've decided that the applicant is not substantially restricted in seeking suitable employment. What is this? What is this suitable employment? Remember, I'm a chef. That's what I have always worked at. I was a musician for a while, but I'm not a working musician anymore. I do a little bit of busking, but I'm not a working musician. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be able to drive here to there with this hip, even if I had the money for a car. So, and even if I was interested in getting into that line of work, because when I had my little girl, I had to give it up because I had to be with her in the mornings. Although the medical evidence shows a level of incapacity, remember they keep throwing up this, you have to be expected to be out of work for a further year as some kind of an impasse. That's not actually an impasse in your application. You only have to show that you have been out of work for a year on the basis of an injury that is continuing and persisting. That's all you have to do. But they've thrown this up because it's something in the legislation and he can't prove that he's going to be out of work for another year. Nobody can. It's all prediction. It's all forecasting. That's why it's much more powerful that you would have been out of work for a year in your application than you will be out of work for a year. The former should actually be more likely to see you gain disability allowance than be prevented from having it, because you've already shown that you've been out of work and substantially restricted from working for an entire 2 years. Then their whole reasoning here for disallowing my claim is absolutely destroyed. And they're just lying to me. They're only lying to me here. Saying we're only going on what the doctor said. Doctor has said this man's been out of work for a long time. He's injured from this period back. He's still injured. He's still incapacitated. And they're not denying that. Look, although the medical evidence shows a level of incapacity. I'm sorry, guys, but a level of incapacity is a disability. Incapacity is just a word for another word for disability. So they're saying, we've acknowledged the level of incapacity. What level of incapacity have you acknowledged? Because if you've looked at the evidence and examined all the documents, the only thing that you could have derived is what the doctor derived. Because you haven't done your own physical examinations. Do you see what I'm saying? So, restricted in seeking suitable employment for 2 years. They're saying that I'm not substantially restricted in seeking suitable employment. Does 2 years not communicate substantial restriction to them? Like what? Like, might as well be talking to that. And they haven't even put their name to it, so you might as well be. For all intents and purposes. Although the medical evidence shows a level of incapacity, so that's them acknowledging a specified disability. A level of incapacity is a specific degree of disability. They're just saying in another way. Level of incapacity is specified disability said differently. It does not show substantial restrictions. 2 years is not substantial restriction to them. This doesn't make sense. Which would preclude the person from taking up work. So they're basically saying, you and your doctor are liars. You and your doctor are liars, and we haven't even assessed you. And not just your GP, but the doctor who examined you in the A&E and the physiotherapist who followed up on him. All liars. 3 doctors that examined me are liars, and the medical assessor must have some kind of superhuman ability to assess people without ever seeing them. Well, if he has this ability, why is he being vague? Why haven't they been any specific at all in telling us what this suitable employment they think take up is? Why the vagueness? Why don't they tell me what they think I'm fit for doing? And then I can just go back on job seekers' allowance and start applying for that type of work. Why leave me in obscurity unless you're trying to harm me? So what's this type of work I'm suitably fit for? What is it? Because a hip is one of your major joints. You hinge with your hip, you sit, you stand, you turn, you walk, you climb, all with your hip. Now, unless they're saying that there's a desk job somewhere for me which requires you to use your hip, I don't know what they're talking about in suitable employment. That I can do 40 hours a week. What is it? Because they seem to be better qualified than everybody else involved in this situation. Why don't they put a bit of a solution there? And tell the people who they've disallowed what work they're fit for. Instead of pushing their little boats out into obscurity there. They're supposed to help people, not leave them to the dogs. The doctor who they helped me to see and pay for, they're not even acknowledging his expertise. They're lying to us. They're saying, I've examined all the documents provided in support of this application. Well, if you had done that, you would know that I have satisfied the legislation because I've been out of work for 2 years. And it says you must be suffering from an injury which has continued for the period of at least a year. I've satisfied that legislation. And if I've satisfied that legislation, that is substantial restriction. 1 year of not being able to work, substantial restriction. Now they might say, well, we're actually talking about the injury, whether the injury substantially restricts you. Well, yeah, the injury is what the doctor has assessed and what he has put me forward for disability on the basis of. Do you have some information he doesn't? Or are you calling him a liar? Or me, perhaps you're calling me a liar. Because that's the only conclusion here that one could come to. You, Stephen, and your doctor, and the other 2 doctors involved in your diagnosis are liars. And you are in fact fit for work, and there is suitable employment out there for you, but we won't tell you what it is, because we're not your medical advisors. That's fraud. And I would bring them to court on that basis. That's fraud. They're saying I haven't satisfied the legislation when I have. They're fraudulently pretending like they have assessed me when they haven't. They haven't assessed me physically or medically. That's not a medical assessor. That's a reader of doctors' reports. And he's not qualified to call those doctors liars or to overrule them in the absence of his own personal physical examinations. That's fraud. The doctors who I have seen have consensus that I am not fit for work. And I have been substantially out of work, and I'm not a lazy person. I still remain as active as I possibly physically can. As painful as it is, I try to stay as active and as self-sufficient as I can. And I contribute to society in different ways that I can. I do a little bit of artwork, I do a little bit of music. That can cheer people up, it can help with the culture. I do my best. But I'm not lying to people when I say I am not fit for work. I am not lying to people. Do you understand? So these are lying to me now. When they say there is suitable work for you and you don't satisfy the legislation when I do. There isn't suitable work for me. I've looked at my list of qualifications and I have looked at the available work and I have looked at my incapacitation, which they have acknowledged, and I have seen that it would be reckless, careless and foolish for me to get back into full-time employment whilst I'm still diagnosed with a hip injury. Now, if they are happy to see me go back into full-time employment and destroy my hip, they're happy to see a man in a wheelchair. And I don't know how I'd push myself around in a wheelchair with 2 damaged rotator cuffs, do you? It would have to be battery operated. So these reckless, fraudulent assessors are lying to me, the doctors who diagnosed me and the social welfare, when they make such a decision on my application. So on that basis, I'm happy to take them to court. If they do not make the right decision. And I'll be putting in a review and an appeal. Because that's outrageous. They're lying to me about the necessary requirements. They put up a false requirement as an imposition, as an impasse. It doesn't have to be that you are forecasting that you'll be out of work for a year. It only has to be that you have been out of work for a year and that you're still injured and that there's no sign of sudden injury. You are injured and currently incapable of going to work. That means you're disabled if you've been out of work for a year. You don't have to show that you will be out of work for a year if you've been out of work for a year. If you've been out of work for 2 years with the same and it hasn't healed, who in their right mind would say, oh yeah, that'll be better in a year? Definitely, when they haven't even looked at you. It doesn't say much for the expertise of the medical assessor. Oh, you've been out of work for 2 years, have you? Oh, what's wrong with you? My hip is sore. Is it any better? No. Ah, you'll be grand in another year. Oh, what are you basing that on? What your doctor said? He said I'm not fit for work. You can put in an appeal if you want. Yes, Mark, what about working in a call centre? What about it? So, as I've said, they say that there's suitable work. They haven't shown what that suitable work is. And until they have shown what the suitable work is, on the basis of, again, your qualifications, then they have to concede that you are disabled. I mean, everybody who is disabled could potentially work in a call centre, but then there'd be nobody on disability allowance. Only paraplegics or those who can't speak. Do you understand how ridiculous that is? That a call centre would be presented as the solution to everybody who's disabled for full-time work. So disability allowance is assessed on the basis of your current qualifications. Has to be. So we will put in the review, we'll put in the appeal, and hold these people accountable to the legislations and the laws of this state, because they're out of control. They're just lying to me now. And if they're lying to me, they're lying to you. So this fraud has to stop. Blessings in Jesus' name.